Veryovkina cave tragedy. Sergei Cheve, a 37-year-old father and thrill seeker from Sochi, Russia, had spent nearly a year obsessing over the Veryovkina cave, the deepest cave on Earth at over 1.3 miles deep. Despite having only caved twice before, Sergei became captivated by the challenge and mystery of this vast subterranean labyrinth. The cave, with its overwhelming depth and near impossible complexity, seemed like an ultimate test for anyone daring enough to face it. To Sergei, it wasn't just a geological marvel, it was something more, a pilgrimage. The Veryovkina cave is a place of staggering difficulty, notorious for its dangerous and complex features. At its base lies a horizontal system that stretches half a mile, filled with razor-thin ledges, rope drops, and narrow water-filled sumps. The cave demands extraordinary skill and meticulous planning to navigate. Professional cavers from the Russian Veryovkina team, among the most seasoned in the world, had taken days to descend and ascend it safely. They moved in teams with a relay system to transport hundreds of pounds of gear and food. Every step was calculated, every possible hazard accounted for. Sergei had heard of the dangers the cave posed, including a near-fatal flash flood that occurred in 2018 during a joint expedition with National Geographic photographer Robbie Shan. While deep underground, the team was suddenly struck by the sound of a distant rumble, which soon turned into the deafening roar of a freight train. The flood surged through the cave, forcing the team to abandon their camp and scramble for higher ground. The water turned a vertical shaft into a waterfall, battering them with freezing spray and nearly drowning them in its ferocity. The team barely escaped with their lives, but the entire lower camp was submerged, leaving behind only a chilling reminder of nature's power. For Sergei, this near disaster didn't act as a deterrent, it ignited something inside him. He studied the photographs from the expedition, pored over maps, and read every available report. The cave wasn't a place to fear, it was an ultimate challenge, one that demanded his presence. Sergei became determined to face the Veryovkina cave on his own terms. On November 1, 2020, Sergei set off for the Caucasus Mountains, planning to embark on a solo expedition to the cave. He told his wife and children that he was leaving for a personal journey to search for the meaning of life. He didn't mention his real destination. He didn't even tell them he was heading to Veryovkina. The cave he believed was his to conquer, and he intended to do so alone. His family would be none the wiser. The journey to the cave was already an incredible challenge. Sergei hiked several kilometers up the forested mountainside to reach the cave's entrance. The terrain was treacherous, slick with moisture, and he navigated it carefully with new crampons and trekking poles. At the gaping entrance of Veryovkina, he stopped to gather himself. There was no official permit for his entry, no radio to call for help, and no team to support him. He was entirely alone, armed only with a rope and a plan he'd drawn from YouTube videos and online forums. Yet, with unwavering determination, he clipped into his rope and began his descent. The first vertical drop was immense, plunging him into an eerie, suffocating silence. Sergei rappelled down into the darkness, his headlamp casting ghostly shadows on the cave's jagged walls. He lowered his gear in waterproof bags, inching further into the earth's depths. That night, Sergei camped over 1,000 feet underground. He settled in a base camp previously used by the Veryovkina team, eating a simple meal, logging his location in the journal, and preparing for the next day. The second day brought even greater challenges. Sergei navigated steep drops and narrow shafts, the rock walls closing in on him as the temperature dropped. The cave grew colder, more isolating, and darker with each passing moment. Finally, he reached another underground camp, this one deeper, colder, and lonelier than the last. Food caches left by previous teams were still present, and old logs offered a glimpse into their experiences. Sergei boiled water, ate a meal, and made a final entry in the camp's journal. November 3rd. That would be the last time anyone heard from him. When the Veryovkina team returned to the cave on November 6th, they immediately sensed something was wrong. They noticed signs of tampering, misplaced gear, and unfamiliar footprints in the dirt. Alarm bells rang. Sergei had been there, and he had gone deeper. As they descended into the cave, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Sergei, with no experience or backup, had ventured beyond his limits, moving deeper into the uncharted territory. It wasn't long before they found him. Near the bottom of the cave, close to a freezing sump, a water-filled end of the main descent, they found Sergei's body. He lay face up in a shallow pool, his headlamp glowing weakly, casting a faint, eerie light. His camera, along with his gear, was nearby, as was a plastic container that held his notes. He had kept detailed records throughout the journey, and his final entries offered insight into his state of mind before he passed. Authorities believe Sergei may have thought he'd reached the cave's final chamber. Eager to mark the moment symbolically, he may have attempted a short swim in the freezing water. However, the water, barely above freezing, quickly sapped his energy. Without a wetsuit, already fatigued and dehydrated, Sergei likely slipped into unconsciousness. A head injury could not be ruled out, and the freezing temperatures would have quickly overwhelmed him. Sergei Cheve died alone in the darkness deep inside Veryovkina cave. Cueva Cheve's tragedy. Quay, nestled high in the mountains of northwest Oaxaca, Mexico, rises to 8,858 feet above sea level. It is one of the deepest caves on Earth, a mysterious abyss that calls to the most seasoned cavers. Every year, these elite explorers return to the cave driven by an insatiable hunger for discovery, the thrill of pushing their endurance to the edge, and the urge to explore the unknown depths of the Earth. For those who have braved its tunnels, the cave is both a marvel and a threat, a place where danger and wonder exist in equal measure. In late February 1991, a team of 14 highly skilled cavers arrived at the entrance of Cueva with a singular mission to reach and clear dive a sump deep within the cave's furthest explored point. This was no small task. The journey to the farthest reaches of the cave required descending 115 vertical drops, rigging ropes along the way to protect them from the sharp abrasive rock faces. To accomplish this, rebels were installed, forcing cavers to disconnect and reconnect their rappel gear mid-air. The task required total focus, precision, and coordination. A mistake could mean the difference between life and death. By February 25th, 6 cavers had successfully descended to Camp 2, 2,790 feet below ground. Over the next few days, others rotated in and out, bringing in much-needed gear and supplies for the team as they pushed deeper into the cave. The work was grueling, each step taken with the knowledge that they were entering a vast, dark realm where danger was never far away. On March 1st, Peter Boston and Peter Haberland re-entered the cave with James Brown, who was recovering from a shoulder injury, and Chris Yerger, who had recently battled illness. They entered in staggered pairs to avoid congestion in the narrow passages of the cave. Yerger and Haberland moved forward, navigating the winding wet shafts of Sacnum's well. As they descended deeper, the cave narrowed further. At one point, Yerger accidentally dropped his rappel rack, an essential piece of gear for controlling descent. It was a small mistake, one that could happen to anyone. But in a place like Cueva, even small mistakes carry heavy consequences. Haberland, ever the professional, lent him his own rack, and Yerger was able to retrieve it. But even the smallest errors seemed to weigh on the team's nerves. By the evening, the two were nearing Camp 2. They had passed through a vast network of dry passages, but had briefly lost their way in the labyrinthine corridors. They finally found the route to the final descent. The two pitched drop into the East Gorge. The first part was a sloped 33 ft drop to a reb. The second was a 75 feet free-hanging vertical shaft. Haberland went first, navigating the rigging with careful precision. The rebel anchor was awkwardly low, forcing him to use a foot ascender to create slack and pass the point safely. Once at the bottom, he called out to Yerger, signaling that the line was clear. But then the silence was shattered by the sound of a rock falling. A rushing gust of air followed, then a sickening thud. Haberland called out, but there was no answer. Heart racing, he peered over the edge, his stomach sinking. There, in the shallow pool at the base of the drop, lay Yerger, motionless. His body was contorted in an unnatural position. One leg was twisted in a way it should never bend. His helmet was askew, and his pack pressed his body into the water. Fear surged through Haberland, but he knew what he had to do. Panicking could make things worse. He quickly descended to Yerger's side, carefully checking his condition. His first instinct was to turn his head to ensure he wasn't drowning, but there was no response. It was clear that something had gone terribly wrong. Overwhelmed but determined, Haberland ran the long distance to Camp 2 in just 15 minutes, his mind racing with thoughts of how to save his friend. Boston and Brown were there. Together, they grabbed gear and rushed back to where Yerger lay. When they reached him, the sight was grim. His face was pale, blood trickled from his nose, and his body remained unresponsive. Boston quickly checked for a pulse, but found nothing. They pulled Yerger from the water and wrapped him in a sleeping bag, performing CPR with all the skill they could muster. Each breath forced into his lungs made a sickening gurgling sound. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. They continued the efforts for 20 minutes, but it became painfully clear that their attempts were in vain. His body began to swell, and a flashlight to his eyes revealed no reaction. Shortly after, he was declared dead. Also mountain tragedy. Ayan al-Asmach, a 26-year-old man from the village of Aluther in Alaska Governor, decided to explore Mount Al-Qara one Saturday afternoon. He wasn't a professional climber, but he loved nature and photography, often sharing photos of his adventures with friends on Mount Al-Qara wasn't one of the region's tallest peaks, but it was known for its rugged beauty, jagged limestone cliffs, narrow ridges, and sudden cracks that cut deep into the rock. It was the perfect place to capture dramatic pictures, but it also held hidden dangers. That day, the weather was clear and the wind was calm. Iman set out alone, aiming to reach a spot near the summit of Zima, about 15 kilometers east of Hof. He moved carefully across the sharp rocks, hopping between boulders and navigating the uneven ground. As he climbed higher, the landscape grew more treacherous. Between the stone faces, deep and narrow cracks split the surface, some of them just a few inches wide, others several feet deep. As the evening approached, Ian pulled out his phone and made a call to one of his relatives. His voice was hoarse and strained. He said he had gotten stuck somewhere, but couldn't clearly describe where he was. Before he could give more information, the call suddenly cut off. After that, all attempts to reach him failed. His phone rang a few times, but soon went silent. When Ian didn't return home that night, his family alerted the authorities. Civil defense teams along with dozens of volunteers began searching the mountain under the cover of darkness. They used flashlights and loudspeakers, hoping that if Ian was still alive, he would hear them. Hours turned into a full day, but there was no sign of him. By Sunday afternoon, a volunteer noticed something glinting at the bottom of a narrow crack between two limestone slabs. It was a smartphone, its screen shattered but still recognizable. Nearby, wedged deep inside the stone, they found Ian's body. He had fallen into a crevice, barely wide enough for a human body to slip through. He was trapped vertically with his arms pinned to his sides and his chest compressed by the stone walls. The intense pressure restricted his breathing and gravity pushed his blood downward, causing his body to swell inside the narrow space. Combined with the searing desert heat, the swelling grew worse by the hour. When rescuers first reached him, they hoped he might still be alive, but it quickly became clear that Ian had already passed away. His skin was pale and he was completely unresponsive. The brutal position had likely taken his life within hours after his final phone call. For the next 2 days, the rescue teams worked carefully, breaking apart the stone piece by piece. Specialized cutting tools were brought in, but progress was slow. The crack was so narrow that even simple movements were difficult, and every effort risked causing more harm. Finally, after nearly 3 full days of work on Tuesday evening, they freed Ian's body from the mountain. Abbey Caves tragedy. On May 9, 2023, a group of students visited Abbey Caves, located just outside Wanga in Northland, New Zealand. It's a popular destination for adventurers and school groups looking to explore underground rock formations and stunning limestone passages. The caves, including Organ Cave, Middle Cave, and Ivy Cave, are known for their beauty, but also pose significant risks. These caves are largely unregulated and are subject to rapid flooding during heavy rainfall, making them dangerous, especially for inexperienced explorers. The weather had been questionable all week. A thunderstorm warning was in place for Northland, and heavy rain was expected later in the day. Despite this, a group of Year 11 students had successfully completed a caving trip on May 8, emerging from the caves without issue. Encouraged by that, Wanga Boys High School pressed ahead with the next group's trip to Organ Cave the night before. Some parents grew uneasy, with one emailing the school asking if the trip was still happening. After receiving confirmation, they chose to keep their son home. Karen's mother, Alicia Toki, shared the same concern. She sent an email asking if the caves were safe. The school responded shortly after, reassuring her that the trip would continue. They were monitoring the weather closely, expecting the heavy rain to hit around 3:00 p.m. The students would be out of the caves by 1:30 p.m. on the morning of May 9th. The school checked the weather again. The rain radar showed a storm hovering above Al-Qara, but no new warnings were issued for Wanga. The decision was made to continue the trip, though only Organ Cave would be explored. By 9 a.m., 17 students, a teacher, and a responsible adult arrived at Abbey Caves. The rain had been light, and they suited up in overalls, helmets, headlamps, and gumboots, leaving their phones in the van. Reception was non-existent inside the caves. 30 minutes after arrival, they entered Organ Cave. Outside, rain pounded Wanga and the storm clouds grew darker. Water rushed along roads and sidewalks and rivers swelled, their surfaces broken by relentless rain. Andre, Peter, Karen's father, saw the transformation unfolding. His backyard was turning into a shallow pond. Puddles expanded into pools. Concerned, he checked weather reports and saw rain warnings, flood risks, and storm advisories. The forecast had been wrong. The heavy rain wasn't arriving in the afternoon, it was already here. Andre called the school asking if the group was still in the caves. The response was uncertain. 40 minutes later he called again, but the flooding outside was worse and the school gave no reassuring response. He called once more, but the school assured him there was nothing to worry about. Inside Organ Cave, the students had no idea what was happening above ground. They had followed a familiar route along the creek bed, stepping through shallow, crystal-clear water that trickled over smooth rock. The cave walls, damp and textured, glistened under the glow of their headlamps. The air smelled of earth, moisture, and ancient stone. After moving about 150 meters in, the passage split into two. The group took the upper passage where the ceiling arched higher and glowworms clung to the rock, casting an eerie blue-green light that pulsed faintly. The beauty of the scene captivated the students, and they lingered for about 20 minutes. Their voices hushed in awe. The water, which had barely reached their knees, was now rising. The teacher noticed something was off. The gentle trickle of water had turned into a rushing sound, the flow building in momentum. He crouched down, pressing his hand to the water, which was higher than before. Looking back at the way they had come, the entrance was no longer visible. The passage behind them was swallowed by the rising water. The teacher shouted for them to get out immediately. The group rushed to the main tunnel, but the water had become waist-deep and was moving fast. The cave had turned into a funnel, churning with relentless force. The teacher shouted for the students to hold on to each other and stay together. The students obeyed, linking arms and fighting to stay upright as the water surged against them. Some students lost their footing and one slipped under. Karan was in the worst possible spot in the path of the strongest current. The water had carved a deep hole in the cave floor, transforming it into a deadly vortex. The current yanked Karan off balance, and before he could react, he dropped into the hole, the water swallowing him up to his chest. His classmates watched in horror, frozen for a split second before one of them lunged forward. The student grabbed Karan, trying to pull him up, but the current was unrelenting. Karan was pulled deeper into the crevice, his body twisting in the water. The student holding him struggled to maintain his grip, but the force of the water was too much. Karan's overalls acted as anchors, dragging him down further. The student pulled with all his strength, trying to rescue Karan, but the current grew stronger, and Karan was torn away. His classmates saw his wide, panicked eyes and his mouth open in a silent scream before the water dragged him completely under. Outside at 10:35 a.m., the emergency call was made. Emergency responders rushed to Abbey Caves, sirens piercing the heavy rain. The 16 surviving students, soaking wet and shivering, stood near the cave entrance, their faces pale, but one was missing. Police arrived, then search and rescue teams, but the floodwaters inside the cave were still too high. For hours, there was nothing they could do. By 7 p.m., the floodwaters began to recede. Rescuers moved in using underwater cameras to scan the cave. After hours of searching, they found Karan's body pinned against a rock formation, his leg caught between boulders. Outside, his family had waited all day, and now their worst fear was confirmed. Karan has died. The tragedy shocked New Zealand. Investigations revealed that the school had failed to properly assess the risks, despite multiple warnings. In May 2024, WorkSafe New Zealand charged the school's board for exposing students to serious harm. The court ordered the school to pay over $500,000 in reparations in July 2024, acknowledging the devastating impact on Karan's family and classmates. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for similar ones and feel free to drop suggestions for the next video in the comments.